The colonel's laughter echoed through his office like a death sentence. Sergeant Astra Blackwood had endured his accusations of malingering, his dismissal of her medical needs, his assumption that she was gaming the system. But when the 26-year-old communications specialist made a decision that would expose the truth hidden beneath her uniform, one question would haunt Fort Bragg forever. How had 47 pieces of shrapnel from a Kandahar IED blast created the military's most powerful advocate for invisible wounds? Astra Blackwood stood at attention in the crisp morning air of Fort Bragg, her uniform pressed to perfection despite the early hour. At 26, she had already earned respect among her peers as a dedicated communications specialist, but today felt different. Today she was reporting to Colonel Magnus Remington, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. The colonel's office was exactly what Astra expected. Medals lined the walls, photographs of military ceremonies covered his desk, and the American flag stood proudly in the corner. Colonel Remington himself was an imposing figure, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, with silver hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see through everything and everyone. "Sergeant Blackwood," he said, without looking up from the papers on his desk, "I've been reviewing your file. Impressive record, but I noticed you've been requesting additional medical leave. Care to explain?" Astra's heart began to race. She'd hoped this conversation wouldn't come so soon, but she knew it was inevitable. The recent headaches, the dizzy spells, the moments when sounds seemed too loud and lights too bright, they were becoming harder to hide. "Sir, I've been experiencing some health issues that require regular medical attention," she replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. Colonel Remington finally looked up, his expression skeptical. "Health issues? You're 26 years old, Sergeant. What kind of health issues could a young soldier like you possibly have that require so much medical attention?" The way he said it made Astra's stomach turn. She could hear the disbelief in his voice, the assumption that she was somehow trying to avoid her duties. It was a tone she had encountered before, but never from someone so high in the chain of command. "Sir, I prefer not to discuss the specific details, but I assure you that my medical needs are legitimate and documented by the base medical staff," Astra said, maintaining her composure despite feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Colonel Remington leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Sergeant, I've been in the military for 34 years. I've seen soldiers try every excuse in the book to get out of their responsibilities. Young people today seem to think they can claim some mysterious ailment and get special treatment." Astra felt a flash of anger, but suppressed it quickly. "Sir, with all due respect, this is not an excuse. I take my duties seriously and have never shirked my responsibilities." "Is that so?" the colonel said, picking up her file again. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to game the system. What's next, Sergeant? Are you going to tell me you have some invisible injury from your time overseas?" The words hit Astra like a physical blow. She had indeed served overseas in Afghanistan, but she had never spoken about what happened there. The official reports were classified, and she had been instructed to keep the details confidential. Very few people knew the full story of her deployment. "Sir, I completed my overseas deployment with distinction," she said, her voice beginning to show strain. Colonel Remington stood up and walked around his desk, stopping just a few feet from Astra. "Let me tell you something, Sergeant. I've seen real soldiers with real injuries. I've seen men and women who've sacrificed everything for this country, and I can spot a malingerer from a mile away." Astra's hands began to tremble slightly, but she kept them clasped behind her back. The colonel's words were not just dismissive, they were insulting everything she had been through, everything she had sacrificed. "I understand your concern, sir, but I assure you that my medical needs are genuine," she repeated, though her voice was becoming quieter. "Genuine?" Colonel Remington laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the small office. "Sergeant, you look perfectly healthy to me. You stand straight, you speak clearly. You show no obvious signs of any serious medical condition. What am I supposed to believe? That you have some secret injury that only appears when it's convenient for you?" The laugh was what broke something inside Astra. It wasn't just skeptical, it was cruel. It dismissed not only her current struggles, but also the very real trauma she carried from her service. She had been trying so hard to be professional, to handle this situation with dignity, but the colonel's attitude was making it impossible. "Sir, appearances can be deceiving," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "Can they now?" The colonel returned to his chair, leaning back with an expression of smug satisfaction. "Well then, Sergeant, why don't you enlighten me? What exactly is this mysterious condition that requires so much medical attention but leaves no visible trace?" Astra stood in silence for a long moment. She knew that revealing the truth would change everything, but the colonel's dismissive attitude was pushing her toward a decision she had hoped to avoid. Astra took a deep breath and made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of the conversation. Her hands moved to the collar of her uniform, and she began to unbutton it with deliberate, measured movements. The colonel's expression shifted from smugness to confusion as he watched her actions. "Sergeant, what exactly do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of alarm. "Sir, you said appearances can be deceiving. You want to see proof of my medical condition? I'm going to show you." As she opened her uniform shirt, the colonel's eyes widened in shock as he watched her. Across Astra's chest and shoulder were a series of raised, twisted scars, the unmistakable marks of shrapnel wounds. The scars were extensive, creating a pattern that spoke of violence and survival. Some were small, like tiny craters in her skin, but others were long, jagged lines that told the story of metal fragments that had torn through flesh and muscle. The silence in the room was deafening. The colonel's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The confident, dismissive expression on his face disappeared completely, replaced with something that looked like horror and shame. "These are from an IED explosion in Kandahar province," Astra said quietly, her voice now completely calm. 3 years ago, my convoy was attacked while we were delivering communication equipment to a remote outpost. The blast killed 2 of my fellow soldiers and left me with 47 pieces of shrapnel in my body. She turned slightly, revealing more scars along her side and back. Each mark was a testament to a moment when her world had exploded into chaos, fire, and screaming metal. The colonel stared in stunned silence. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "The military team was able to remove most of the fragments," Astra continued, "but several pieces were too close to vital organs to extract safely. They remain in my body, and sometimes they shift. When they do, I experience severe headaches, dizziness, and sometimes temporary hearing loss." Colonel Remington finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Sergeant, I had no idea." "No, sir, you didn't, because I don't talk about it, because I don't use it as an excuse, because I continue to serve despite the pain, because this is what I chose to do with my life."